Number 1. In case you're wondering, I'm a female in my 20s. I'm 5'2" and about 100 pounds. This event happened recently while I was at work. It had been a busy day at my small office following a 4-day holiday weekend. Things had slightly settled down by 4 p.m. when a client stopped by to pick up some paperwork. I've known this client for over 3 years now. The extent of our relationship is nothing beyond professional small talk. Nate is a big, burly dude with a shaved head and a long beard. In all the time I've known him, we haven't had any major issues. While I'm not sure if this is relevant, I do feel that I should point out that Nate had been acting rather odd towards me for the past year. Little things, but enough for me to take notice. If I answered the phone when he would call, he wouldn't say anything and just hang up. He'd be super friendly with my coworkers, but completely ignore me. That behavior all began about a year prior, when my boss informed him that I was also a fellow scuba diver. After discovering this information, Nate repeatedly asked me to be his diving buddy, while assuring me that he knew all the best spots and where to find the secret shipwrecks. He wrote his number on a piece of paper and asked me to call him, but I never did. When he began acting strangely towards me, I had just assumed that he was offended that I didn't want to go out with him. So on to the reason why this story ever happened. I had had chronic hiccups for the past 15 years. They literally just started out of nowhere one day and have never stopped. Usually, I only get 1 or 2 small ones throughout the day, which my friends lovingly refer to as my hourly hiccups. However, maybe once or twice a month, I get a bout, which can last hours. I've seen a doctor about this, yet it still remains a mystery. And this was one of those days where I could not, for the life of me, stop hiccuping. I was in my office while Nate stayed in the main lobby area where my boss assisted him. About 5 minutes into their conversation, he yelled, "I know the cure for your hiccups." To which I chuckled. Believe me, I've tried every old wise tale and trick known to man. What I have learned in over a decade is that the only thing that actually works is time. I continued working in my office, trying to stifle my hiccups and not be too loud. After 3 years of working here, all my coworkers knew about my problem and barely even noticed it anymore. About 45 minutes go by, and my hiccups still haven't stopped. At this point, I'm personally getting a little fed up. Anyone who's had hiccups for a lengthy amount of time knows that eventually your abdomen muscles get sore and you start to feel nauseous. So when Nate said again, I know a cure for your hiccups," I was desperate for relief. I walked out of my office and approached him. "Okay, Nate, what's your secret?" I asked, to which he simply replied, "You'll see." Figuring it was the unusual method to frighten me, I firmly informed him that I did not want to be scared. I'm just one of those people who hates getting startled. Go figure. Nate continues to walk past me and says nothing, so I figured his original plan to spook me had been sabotaged by my response. I was just about to turn around and get back to work when he grabbed me from behind, and suddenly he threw me into a choker hold while forcefully covering my mouth and nose with his hand. Immediately, panic sets in, and I struggle to free myself, but his grip only gets tighter and more intense. It felt like I was being coiled by a boa constrictor. No matter how hard I tried to get him off me, I couldn't compete with his body weight and strength. I began to punch and kick him, but it only seemed to make him angrier. My vision started to turn black, and I became incredibly tired and dizzy. I could feel myself about to pass out. All I wanted was to breathe. How could this be happening? I was about to be murdered at my damn workplace, while my colleagues were just one room over the entire time. Although this moment felt like a lifetime, it probably only lasted about 2 minutes. I tried to scream and make noise, but my mouth was covered too tightly. The taste of his hand filled my mouth, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Right as I was drifting out of consciousness, I heard someone yell,
"Hey, get off of her! Let her go!"
My boss had previously been making a phone call in his office and just entered the lobby. He approached Nate and dragged him off of me. After the ambush, Nate released me from his grip and began to walk towards the exit nonchalantly. While I fumbled and gasped for air, Nate turned to face me before he left. With a sick and twisted smile, he told me, "That got rid of your hiccups." He proceeded to leave while I fought back the tears that were welling. I didn't want him to think he'd won somehow. Once he was gone, my boss asked me if I was okay. I only nodded, out of embarrassment that I'd start crying if I attempted to answer. As I made my way back to the office, my brain tried to comprehend what the hell had just transpired in the past 3 minutes. Nothing else was mentioned after Nate left. I wore a collared shirt the next day to hide the bruises that covered my neck. I'm sure Nate would say he was just kidding, but the way he drew pleasure from my pain and suffering does not lead me to believe this. My boyfriend wanted me to press assault charges, but honestly, I didn't see the point. Firstly, the police in my area tend to do nothing in these types of situations. And the most disturbing part of all, my boss backed Nate up. He's known him for almost 20 years and pretty much told me that I asked him to do it. I asked him to do it? You gotta be kidding me. What hurts the most is that he doesn't really seem to care about my safety or well-being. I fear it's only a matter of time before I see Nate again, because he's still a client at my work. And since I'm not the business owner, I can't prevent him from returning. In fact, events like this happening in my workplace are the reason why I'm currently looking for a new job. Hopefully when Nate does come back, I'll no longer be there. I truly hope we never meet again. Number 2. It was my first full-time job, a shipping and receiving gig at a small metal treatment company near Detroit. One of the ladies I worked with, let's call her Debbie, seemed like a nice woman, and she was helpful as I was struggling to understand the computer system. However, something about her just seemed off. Her mannerisms, personality, and the overall look in her eyes just made me feel like something wasn't right, and always gave me weird vibes. We had a common shared unisex bathroom with one stall in this facility, which was right near my workstation. On my second or third week there, I heard what sounded like screaming and objects falling over in there. It was just her in the bathroom, screaming at literally nothing. From that point, I tried my best to avoid her, but she seemed to follow me around, as if she knew I was trying to avoid her. I'd head up to the front office to drop off some paperwork or ask management a question, and she'd just be there, standing a few feet behind me, and waiting for me to return to the factory floor. I complained to the floor supervisor, and he seemed hesitant, at the least, to do anything about it. I was basically told to just brush it off. One night, I decided to try and find her on Facebook. Not sure why, something just came over me. I couldn't find her on any social media, but what I did find made my stomach churn. Dozens of news articles about her 10 years prior. Debbie picked her kids up from school, claiming they had a doctor's appointment. She gave her 2 children a near lethal dose of painkillers in their hot chocolate before drinking some herself. From there, she poured gasoline on the floor of her home, which was 10 miles from my shop. While her kids were falling asleep, she ignited the home. Her kids, who thankfully did not drink enough of the hot chocolate, managed to wake up and discover that the home was on fire and immediately ran to a neighbor's house. And then that neighbor ran in and dragged Debbie out while firefighters arrived. Long story short, she ended up pleading insanity and got a reduced sentence, and got out even earlier than that for good behavior. My heart dropped as I scrolled and saw her mugshot. It wasn't just a case of someone with a familiar name. It was her. Her dead eyes stared through my phone screen. I was sick. I had to turn off my phone and go to sleep. Needless to say, it was an awkward couple of weeks at work until I could find another job and get the hell out of there. Number 3. So I'm gonna start off with a little backstory. I was a 20-year-old college student working nights at a laundromat under the table in a crap hole town called Woonsocket in Rhode Island. It was a very low income area. Lots of prostitutes asking to use my phone. Crack house right across the street. Place had been robbed a few times. And a few streets down was a serial killer who chopped a bunch of hookers up and flushed them down the toilet. So I think we can agree, it was a very sketchy place. I worked alone and had a key to the place. It was dark, and I was going to be closing within the hour. The only customers I had left were a Hispanic couple and their young son. And things went smoothly until a burly 40-something-year-old Rastafarian man came in looking very angry and without any laundry. He glared at me and walked past, going directly towards the Hispanic couple. He kept speaking loudly to himself, circling the place and sweating profusely. He sat down for about 10 minutes, got up, and then sat down again. The last time he got up, he went over to the toy machine, purchased a toy, and approached the child. And I could see the concern in the boy's parents' faces. So being the attendant, I approached him as gently as possible and said that the owner would please only let customers here if they're going to do laundry. He exploded, telling me that it was my fault his people were in this country in the first place, and that I'm manipulative and a liar, and that one day someone was gonna dump me in a trash can, dump me all over the ground. All the while, he was pointing his finger in my face, so angry that spittle was flying and moving closer to me. I started telling him that I was sorry, and I didn't mean to offend him, that I just didn't want to get in trouble, as I looked around at nearby pens and other things that I could use as a possible weapon if he tried to hurt me. He stormed out and paced around the parking lot, glaring inside for the next few minutes. So I called the police and my boss. And by the time they showed up and escorted me out, he was gone. 2 days later, I get a call at home from a detective telling me there was a stabbing in the parking lot an hour after I closed. After I gave him a description, he said it matched and told me that the victim was a blonde, petite woman about my height, matching my description. I stopped working there. I never found out if the girl was seriously injured or if the guy was caught. I'll always wonder what happened, and if he truly was looking for me in that parking lot. Number 4. I'm working valet at a hotel. It's about 7:30 a.m. My shift just started. And I'm just standing there in my workstation when out of nowhere, this guy walks up to me and starts telling me that I need to start respecting women and not talking to them the way I have been. Mind you, this is 7:30 in the morning. I have no idea who this guy is, and I haven't even talked to anyone except for the other valet I'm working with. I just tell him, "I don't know what you're talking about, man. Are you a guest here?" He says, "You don't need to know about me. I got connections with the police department." Okay, buddy. And I walk away and back inside the hotel to get the other valet, thinking he's probably just a homeless guy, like we've had to deal with in the past. But by the time we get back out there to keep an eye on him, he's already gone. About a half an hour later, as I'm coming back from parking a car, I hear the same guy yelling at the top of his lungs at the front desk agent, who was a small girl about 5 feet tall. He's telling her that he's going to kill her and her entire family. I can't help but think about the hypocrisy he had talking about respecting women and then saying something like that. So I run up, and he's pointing at her, saying more things like the police lab is closed down, so if someone gets killed, there wouldn't be any evidence or anything. We call the cops immediately, and he leaves before they get there. We give a statement saying what happened and what he was saying. They say okay, and blah blah blah. Nothing happens. Then they leave. As they pull out, the man comes back into the hotel. Apparently he'd been hiding in the bushes around the side, watching and waiting for the cops until they left so that he could come yell more obscenities at us. My manager's there at this point, having just dealt with the cops, and we all tell him that that's the guy. We call the cops again, while this guy is saying how him and his cousins are going to gang rape my manager's wife, and that she's gonna love it. My manager, who happens to not have a wife, responds by saying, "Yeah, I'm sure she will, buddy." That was the first time he came around, but this continued for 2 months, with us calling the cops, him waiting for them to leave, and then coming back in. Until finally, they caught him running down the street and charged him with terrorist threats. We looked him up on our local police department database, and he'd been charged with half a dozen assaults. But luckily, he never hurt anyone at the hotel. About 6 months later, I had just parked a car in the garage, which is detached from the hotel about a 3-minute walk, and I say screw it and go to smoke a cigarette in the stairwell before I head back over to the hotel. As I'm sitting down in the stairwell, on the steps, smoking a cigarette and looking at my phone, I hear keys jingling, coming from around the corner of the floor I'm on. The hairs stand up on the back of my neck. I suddenly feel as if someone's headed right to where I am. Bear in mind that our garage is strictly valet only, so no one, aside from employees, should be there at this time. I get goosebumps and start to run down the stairs, fight or flight mode. And when I get down the steps I was sitting on, I look up. And there he is. The man who was yelling all that stuff at us so long ago is standing at the top of the stairwell, staring at me, smiling. I literally screamed and booked it out of there. I called the cops. When they got there, they found nothing, of course. And after that, I never saw him again.